Captain Darius Cole had logged over 3,000 hours in combat flights, but on his first commercial flight, a white passenger pointed at him and said, "I'm not flying with him up there." The airline pulled Darius from the cockpit to de-escalate the situation. He stood in uniform, humiliated, while passengers watched in silence. Then a single voice spoke up and changed everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The airport buzzed like it always did. Loudspeaker announcements bouncing off high glass walls, impatient travelers dragging roller bags over polished tile, and the occasional burst of laughter or toddler cries breaking the monotony. Amidst the chaos, Marcus Ellison stood still. He was a tall, broad-shouldered black man, with a hard-earned stillness in his posture. His left leg had a slight but noticeable limp, an old war injury from a roadside bombing in Afghanistan that never quite healed. Over his jeans and dark t-shirt, he wore a faded military-style jacket, with subtle army patches and a name tag stitched in Ellison. Clutched in his right hand was a crisp envelope, containing military documents, and an invitation, an official invite to the National Veterans Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. It had taken him years to feel comfortable attending something like this. Recognition didn't come easy to him. Pride, even less. As he approached Gate B-27, the tension that had settled in his shoulders since arriving at the airport hadn't eased. He wasn't new to travel, or to the way eyes sometimes followed him through terminals. He had grown used to the double glances, the subtle clutches of purses, the strained smiles from TSA agents that never quite reached their eyes. But today, he was focused. All he wanted was to get to DC, check into his hotel and prepare his remarks for the panel he'd been asked to join. A white gate agent with a sharp bob haircut and rectangular glasses stood behind the counter, tapping away at her keyboard. Her name tag read C. Moore. She looked up briefly as Marcus approached, her eyes scanning him from boots to shoulders, lingering a beat too long on his skin and jacket. Without greeting him, she nodded toward the general boarding area. "Coach is over there," she said flatly. Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm in first class," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a neatly folded boarding pass. She didn't take it from him. Instead, she gave a tight smile that didn't look like one at all. "That seat's been reassigned." "Reassigned?" Marcus asked, voice calm but firm. "I paid for it." Moore shrugged. "It happens. You'll be in 26B, middle seat."
There was a quiet around them now.
A few other passengers within earshot shifted awkwardly. A white man in a business suit glanced away. A woman with earbuds in paused her music to listen. No one stepped forward. Marcus held his gaze on her. "I'm a veteran. I have my ID and confirmation." "I don't need your whole resume, sir," she said, louder now. "Do you want to board or not?" Her voice cut the air like a cold blade. A TSA agent, posted nearby, looked over but didn't intervene. Moore finally grabbed the boarding pass from his hand, scanned it with more force than necessary, and shoved it back into his chest. "There, enjoy your flight," she said with a smirk. Marcus said nothing. The instinct to speak up, to push back, was there. But so was the exhaustion. This wasn't new. He had faced more dignified insults from men aiming guns at him overseas. This was just another quiet battle on home soil. As he boarded the plane, he passed the polished leather seats of first class, the ones he was supposed to be in. White passengers sipped water, adjusted neck pillows, stared into phones. No one met his eyes. Row 26 was halfway back, near the wing, cramped and already crowded. Marcus squeezed between a teenage girl, chewing gum, and a tired-looking mother juggling a toddler. The overhead bin was full. He stowed his jacket under the seat and sat down slowly, his injured leg protesting. A flight attendant paused beside him as passengers continued to board. She was a young black woman, likely no older than 25. She glanced at his jacket, then at his face, reading the story he hadn't spoken. "I saw them move you," she whispered. "Some people think they own the front of the plane." Marcus gave a small, bitter smile. "It's not the first time." The girl across the aisle, about 16, raised her phone discreetly and began recording. She had seen what happened at the gate. Her hands trembled slightly, uncertain, but driven. As the plane filled, murmurs traveled through the cabin like static electricity. Some had caught wind of the exchange at the gate. Others sensed something was off. Marcus sat quietly, staring out the window. watching baggage handlers toss luggage like it didn't carry someone's life inside. In the cockpit, Captain John Harlow, a seasoned white pilot with salt and pepper hair, watched through the monitor as Marcus was escorted down the aisle to coach. He frowned. He'd recognized the name on the manifest, Sergeant Marcus Ellison, former Army, Bronze Star, a man he'd heard speak once at a military reunion, years ago. He leaned back in his seat, jaw tightening. "You see that?" he muttered to the co-pilot beside him. The co-pilot didn't respond. Captain Harlow unbuckled, still watching the small screen showing the cabin feed. "That's not just a mistake," he said quietly. "That was intentional." He reached for the cabin phone, his eyes locked on the screen. "Get me ground control. We've got a problem." Marcus sat rigid in seat 26B, knees pressed against the tray table in front of him. The window at his side revealing the tarmac shimmering under the late afternoon sun. The hum of engines masked the whispers spreading through the cabin. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes, but there was no rest in that stillness. Beneath the stoicism was a storm. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He'd trained himself over years, maybe decades, not to show anger where white eyes could misread it. But the embarrassment still burned. The cold finality in the gate, Agent's voice, the sharp edge of her smirk, the stares that slid away. It was the same tone men had used overseas, except without the camouflage and rifles. He remembered Iraq like fragments from a dream. Blinding sun, heat that felt like it could peel the skin off bone, and dust that stuck in his throat for months after he returned. He'd gone in young, proud, sharp, too sharp. His drill sergeant once told him, "Ellison, you got that hero complex. That'll get you killed, or promoted, maybe both." Neither happened the way it should have. He lost 2 brothers in arms within 3 years. Corporal Isaiah Freeman, his childhood friend from Baltimore, who stepped on an IED just feet ahead of Marcus on patrol. They'd grown up on the same street, made the same promises to their mothers, and deployed together. Isaiah didn't make it past 22. Then there was Staff Sergeant Nick Talbot, white, from Nebraska, who bled out in Marcus's lap after a convoy ambush. Marcus had carried Talbot half a mile on a shredded knee before collapsing. He was awarded a Bronze Star for valor. No cameras, no ceremony. His name was mentioned once in the base newsletter. Yet promotions eluded him. Reviews always glowing, disciplined, mission-focused, resilient. But the leadership chain never budged. Others moved up. He stayed still. A senior officer once told him, offhandedly over lunch, "You're good, Ellison. But let's be honest, black sergeants come with baggage. Media loves them, but the brass doesn't." He smiled through it, like always. When an IED finally clipped the left side of their Humvee during his 3rd deployment, tearing into his thigh and nearly severing a tendon, he didn't cry out. He just laid there, jaw clenched, blood pooling under him, thinking not of death, but how he'd have to start from scratch all over again. Stateside, recovering, rehabbing, the incident was labeled career-ending by medical. His white commander, young, Ivy League educated, all polished pride told him in a flat voice during discharge processing, "You're lucky you're still employable." That one stung. Not the words. The truth inside them. He returned home to Atlanta, with a permanent limp, and a chest full of swallowed things. Not just grief. Not just disillusionment. But an understanding. America would clap for his uniform, salute his sacrifice, and still not see him. Still, he refused to become bitter. That felt like another war, and he was done fighting. He volunteered at local shelters, tutored young black boys through a church mentorship program, never told them about what he endured in the Army, not because he wanted to protect them from the truth, but because he didn't want to discourage them from dreaming. But this flight, this simple mundane moment, felt like a fracture he couldn't tape over. Maybe it was the look in Moore's eyes. Maybe it was how easily everyone around her let it happen. How familiar it all was. Across the aisle, the teenage girl lowered her phone slowly. She'd caught everything. Marcus being turned away from first class. The subtle humiliation. His quiet compliance. She didn't know him. Didn't know his name. But something about how he carried himself told her this wasn't just a man being mistreated. This was history replaying itself in real time. She uploaded the video. The caption was short. This black veteran just got bumped from his paid first-class seat. No reason. No apology. By the time the seatbelt sign blinked on, it had already been shared by 2 mid-tier activist accounts. Within 5 minutes, it was moving. Back at the front of the plane, The black flight attendant, Shayla, felt her phone vibrate. A brief glance at the screen made her blink. She stepped into the galley and looked again. The video was trending. The flight hadn't even left the ground. She walked toward the back of the cabin, pausing just beside row 26. Marcus kept his eyes on the window, but he noticed her shadow. "Sir," she said softly, "can I get you anything?" "No, thank you," he replied, not turning. Shayla hesitated. She leaned in just a bit. "I know who you are." Marcus finally looked at her. She nodded slightly. "You spoke at my cousin's base in EU9, Fort Bragg. He said you saved lives." Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "I just want you to know," Shayla added. "I saw what they did to you, and you're not alone up here." He nodded once. "Thank you." She touched his shoulder briefly before walking away. He closed his eyes again. But this time something felt different. The shame was still there, but now so was a spark. Someone saw, someone remembered, and someone recorded. In the front galley, Shayla's phone rang. A call routed through ground control. She frowned and picked it up. "This is Flight 40A2, she answered. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent.
Whatever's happening on that plane, it's going viral, right now. You need to alert the captain. Immediately.
Shayla froze as her screen refreshed again. The video had crossed 100,000 views, and someone had just tagged the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The seatbelt light dimmed with a soft chime, but the tension in the cabin never followed. The plane had leveled out at cruising altitude, and the clouds outside Marcus's window floated like indifferent ghosts. He sat stiffly in his narrow seat, eyes scanning the sky outside, hands clasped tightly in his lap. He didn't know it yet, but the world beyond the fuselage was already watching. 23 rows ahead, Shayla returned to the galley with her phone clenched in her palm. The flight attendant's pulse hadn't slowed since the call from ground control. She refreshed the feed. Again and again, the numbers climbed like an altimeter in freefall. The teenage girl's video had cracked 50,000 views in under 20 minutes. That number doubled before the hour. It had been retweeted by a Navy veteran with 3 million followers, then stitched on TikTok by a young black lawyer in Atlanta, who added, "Imagine putting your life on the line for a country that won't give you a seat you paid for." Underneath the original post, the hashtag Jean Vet Not Welcome was catching fire. Then came Flying While Black. It wasn't just a viral video anymore. It was a movement waiting for ignition. In the airline's glass tower headquarters in Dallas, the PR team huddled in a basement conference room around a large monitor. Faces were pale. The head of digital risk, a 30-something white man with sleeves rolled up, muttered, "Why do they always go for the emotional one?" The chief communications officer, a sharp-featured woman in a navy pantsuit, tapped her pen nervously. "We need a draft statement now. Use the language, isolated incident. Internal investigation. Diversity is a core value. You know the drill." "Should we name the passenger?" someone asked. "No, not yet. Don't confirm anything until legal clears it." But legal wouldn't be fast enough. Within another 15 minutes, someone on board had uploaded a still photo of Marcus, sitting straight-backed in coach, a shadow of hurt just behind his calm expression. His army name patch visible, his dignity unmistakable. It was all over Twitter. "This is Sergeant Marcus Ellison, Bronze Star, denied first class because he didn't look the part." The comment section exploded. "Imagine having to fight for the seat you paid for. This is America. If you're black, even your sacrifice gets a seat in the back. I'm platinum with this airline." Not anymore. Influencers shared it. Veterans posted side-by-side photos of Marcus in uniform and Marcus in seat 26B, middle seat, back row. Civil rights groups issued open statements. One progressive congresswoman called for a full investigation into racial bias across major airlines. A retired general even chimed in, "If this is how we treat our soldiers at home, God help us abroad." And all the while, Marcus remained unaware. He sat quietly, unbothered by the flurry beyond the clouds. The internal rhythm of endurance had kept him from constantly scanning for offense or sympathy. He wasn't looking for validation. He just wanted peace. But the cabin wasn't peaceful. Whispers had started near the middle rows. Passengers scrolled through their phones with slack jaws, nudging seatmates. One couple in row 21 gasped when they realized the man in the viral video was just 5 rows behind them. A college-aged woman, visibly upset, whispered to the passenger next to her, "This is wild. I saw the whole thing at the gate. Two business-class passengers muttered to each other, clearly uncomfortable. You think they'll offer him a refund? One asked. No, man. This is gonna get way bigger than that. In row 26, Shayla stopped by Marcus again, kneeling beside his seat with the service cart behind her. Can I offer you a drink, Mr. Ellison? She said gently. On the house. He blinked at her, his expression still composed. You know my name. Shayla gave a tight smile. Word travels fast up here. Marcus exhaled quietly, nodding once. Thank you. But I'm good. Sir, she said again, voice low. I just want to say thank you for your service. And for how you're handling all of this. He looked out the window again, as if the sky had answers. I didn't do it for thanks. Shayla lingered for a moment, before moving on, but her glance over her shoulder was laced with concern. She knew he didn't fully grasp what was unraveling just a few feet in front of him. He was a man used to shouldering injustice quietly, but this wasn't quiet anymore. Back in the cockpit, Captain John Harlow sat tensely in his seat, reading texts from ground control. He'd been alerted about the trending video, the gate agent's name, the veteran's identity, the view count. He closed the flight manual gently and sighed. This can't be ignored, he muttered. His co-pilot said nothing. Uncomfortable. Harlow unbuckled his seatbelt. Where are you going? The younger man asked. To do something I should have done 20 minutes ago. He pushed open the cockpit door and stepped into the aisle. As he walked past first class, whispers erupted. A few passengers tried to stop him, pointing at their phones. Captain, that's him. The man they bumped. He's in the back. That's him. Harlow didn't pause. Row by row, heads turned. By the time he reached row 26, a small hush had rippled across the cabin. Marcus looked up. The captain stood before him. There was a pause, like a breath between thunderclaps. Mr. Ellison, Harlow said, his voice steady but low. May I speak with you privately? Before Marcus could answer, a passenger shouted from behind them. Check your phones. The airline just deleted their Twitter. Captain John Harlow stood in the aisle of row 26, tall and deliberate, with the same kind of presence that once made him a respected officer in the Air Force. His uniform had changed, but his sense of duty hadn't. Beneath his calm demeanor, he was furious. The man seated before him wasn't just another passenger. Marcus Ellison. Harlow had recognized the name the moment he saw the manifest back in the cockpit. Sergeant Marcus Ellison, Bronze Star recipient, Afghanistan Theater, 3 tour. He had once watched Ellison speak at a leadership panel on post-trauma integrity and moral endurance. His story stuck with Harlow, not just because of the war stories, but because Marcus had said something that haunted him since I didn't survive to be silent. Now here he was, silenced in seat 26B, humiliated and boxed in by a decision that had nothing to do with logistics and everything to do with skin color. Marcus looked up at the captain, his face impassive but alert. Mr. Ellison, Harlow said again, quieter this time, bending down to speak without drawing more attention. My name's Captain John Harlow. I was at Fort Benning in 2013. I remember your talk. Marcus blinked. He gave a small nod as if unsure how to respond. That was a long time ago. Too long for some of us to forget what's right, Harlow replied. He glanced around the row. I saw what happened at the gate. Marcus sighed softly and looked toward the window again. Doesn't matter. Flight's in the air. Life moves on. No, Harlow said. Not this time. The captain stood upright again. Would you walk with me for a moment? Marcus didn't want the attention. He never had. But something in the captain's tone, respectful, not pitying, nudged him to rise. The pain in his left leg flared, but he ignored it. Slowly, he stepped into the aisle and followed Harlow down the narrow corridor, eyes and whispers trailing behind him like invisible threads. They reached the front galley, near the cockpit. Shayla stood nearby, watching with an anxious expression. Harlow opened the cockpit door halfway and motioned for Marcus to step in. Just briefly. The co-pilot, startled, turned in his seat, but Harlow waved him off. Once inside, the door closed behind them. Listen, Harlow said, tone measured. I'm going off protocol for this, so I'll be brief. What happened to you wasn't an error. I've been flying for this airline for 12 years. Gate agents don't accidentally reassign a first-class seat without specific direction. Marcus didn't answer. His eyes scanned the gauges as if they offered more truth than the people below. I called HQ from here. Harlow continued. They're scrambling, trying to contain this before it lands, literally and digitally. I didn't ask for that, Marcus said. I know. But the fire is lit, and the only way we stop it from burning you instead of them is to tell the truth. From inside, Marcus raised an eyebrow. You think they'll let that happen? I don't care what they let me do, Harlow said. I still wear this uniform because I believe in accountability. I'm making an announcement. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You sure you want to do that? Harlow nodded. Absolutely. Marcus gave a slow, reluctant smile, the kind that's not joy, but appreciation. Then make it count. Harlow turned back to the cockpit radio system, flipped on the cabin intercom switch without waiting for clearance, and took a breath. The familiar ding echoed through the plane. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Harlow from the flight deck. I'd like to take a brief moment before we continue our journey to acknowledge something important. Silence fell across the plane. I want to personally recognize that one of our passengers today is Sergeant Marcus Ellison, a decorated combat veteran who served this country with honor and bravery. He was not given the respect he deserved before boarding this flight, and for that I am deeply sorry. Gasps could be heard in different sections of the cabin. Phones rose. Recording resumed. Harlow continued. We honor all veterans equally on this flight. No seat class changes that, and no employee discretion should override human dignity. There was a pause. I thank you all for flying with us. And I thank Sergeant Ellison for everything he has sacrificed so that all of us, even the ones who forget what that sacrifice means, can fly free. He clicked off the intercom. Back in the galley, Shayla stared at the captain with a look that balanced awe and disbelief. Marcus said nothing. He stepped out quietly, returned to his seat and sat down again as if it were just another mission. But the cabin was buzzing. The statement had transformed murmurs into movement. Applause broke out in scattered sections. Mostly from coach. First class remained largely quiet. Harlow returned to the cockpit, face calm, but his heart pounded. He knew what he had just done wasn't brave. It was necessary. But in an airline industry bound by procedure and public image, necessary often got people fired. Within 5 minutes, his direct line rang. He answered it. Captain Harlow, this is Operations Manager Vance. We just heard your announcement. I figured you would. You were not authorized to speak on that incident. I don't need authorization to tell the truth. There was a pause. The voice on the line turned colder. You're being replaced mid-flight. We're rerouting you to Charlotte. Another captain will take over from there. Harlow said nothing for a long second. Is that so? Your judgment has been compromised. You're jeopardizing neutrality. Harlow smiled grimly. You think neutrality is what we need right now? But the call had already ended. A redirection alert flashed on the cockpit screen. Flight 4002 divert to CLT. Immediate compliance required. Captain John Harlow stared at the blinking command on the cockpit screen like it had insulted him personally. Divert to CLT. Immediate compliance required. Alternate pilot en route. It was protocol, plain and punitive, and Harlow knew exactly what it meant. He wasn't just being pulled, he was being silenced. His co-pilot, a soft-spoken man in his 30s named Greg, cleared his throat awkwardly. Are we complying? No, Harlow said, flat and immediate. Greg blinked. Sir, that... I said no. He turned away from the screen, hands still steady on the controls. Unless they've got a legitimate safety concern, we finish this flight. We land where we said we would. Anything else, they'll have to fire me after we're on the ground. Greg didn't argue again. Something about Harlow's tone suggested that this wasn't up for debate. Down in coach, whispers were blooming into full conversations. The tension from earlier had now matured into something else entirely. Curiosity mixed with outrage, wrapped in confusion. Phones lit up row after row. The viral video had crossed 400 screenshots of Marcus's boarding pass, the smirk on the gate agent's face, and Harlow's bold mid-air announcement were being dissected in real time across TikTok, Twitter, and Reddit. Marcus hadn't moved, but his name had. He sat with his arms crossed loosely over his chest, his military jacket now partially unzipped, revealing a scarred neckline from an old surgery. Another invisible wound made visible under pressure. He wasn't trying to read anyone's screen, but the soft buzz of voices saying his name was impossible to ignore. Is that really him? Bro, this guy got shafted, and now the airline's trying to spin it? My uncle served with him. I swear, he didn't even raise his voice. That's the part that kills me. Even from behind his calm exterior, Marcus felt something sinking deeper than anger. Weariness. Not the physical kind, but the kind that wraps around your bones after decades of proving you're worth what others are freely given. He turned to the teenage girl beside him, Kayla, he had learned, and asked quietly, "Did you post it?" She hesitated, surprised. "I did. I didn't know if I should have. But I." Marcus raised a hand gently. Not in protest, but peace. "It's okay. You did what felt right." She looked relieved, but still uneasy. "You're trending. Everywhere." He nodded once, then looked away again. Up front, Shayla was dealing with another issue. A call had come in from corporate communications, routed through the captain's frequency. They asked to speak with her directly. "This is Shayla." "Hi, we're getting ahead of the story. We're preparing a press statement. It's essential you use the language we provide if any passengers ask questions." "What kind of language?" she asked warily. Miscommunication at the gate. Clarification underway. Apology for confusion. Internal review. All protocol. Shayla's throat tightened. "That's not what happened." There was a pause. "You're a valuable employee. Just follow the script." She ended the call without a word. Her hand trembled as she pocketed her phone. Moments later, Captain Harlow's voice returned over the intercom. But this time, there was no prepared speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to divert to another airport. That diversion is not due to weather, mechanical failure, or passenger health. I'm telling you this because I believe in transparency." The cabin stirred again. "Unless there is an emergency, and I assure you, there is not, we'll continue to Washington, D.C. as planned." A few passengers applauded softly. Others looked around, unsure if clapping would put them on someone's list. A few in first class grumbled. But the mood had shifted again from uncertain to engaged. Something real was unfolding, and everyone could feel it. Back in 26B, Marcus stared straight ahead, his face now visible in several overhead screens, as news stations began running live coverage with passenger commentary stitched in. He whispered more to himself than anyone else. "This wasn't supposed to be about me." Shayla peered beside him again. She bent down discreetly. "The captain wants to offer you his seat for landing. Says it's the least he can do." Marcus shook his head immediately. "No." She looked surprised. "You sure?" That won't undo it," he said. "He knows that. I know that." She didn't push. At the front of the plane, tension was rising within the crew. A second call from ground control pressed Shayla again for a scripted announcement. This time, she didn't answer. The other attendants started murmuring. "What are we supposed to say if passengers ask questions?" Shayla replied firmly, "The truth." As the plane began its slow descent, the weight of everything compressed into the cabin. Public pressure. Internal panic. Corporate shame trying to wrap itself in PR buzzwords. And then, just as the seatbelt light blinked on again, a woman in row 14 stood up. She was tall, about 50, with salt and pepper hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her face was stern, not angry, but fierce in the way mothers get when injustice is too loud to ignore. "I know that man," she said, her voice calm but strong enough to reach the row behind her. "I know exactly who he is." The plane went silent again. Even the hum of the engines seemed to dim. "I worked at Walter Reed Medical Center for 11 years. Marcus Ellison wasn't just a patient, he was a miracle. He survived things I've seen kill men twice his size and half his age." She turned toward Marcus's row and said, "Y'all don't know half his story." A pause. Heads turned. "Y'all don't know how many white officers he shielded. How many black soldiers looked up to him. How often he spoke up for others when it cost him promotions. How many of us he inspired." Marcus stared ahead, jaw tight. Her eyes scanned the rows. "You think this is about a seat? It's never about the seat." Just then, another alert pinged across the plane's Wi-Fi. A leaked internal message from the airline's PR team had just been posted online, revealing their plan to bury the incident entirely. The murmur of confusion still hung in the cabin, like smoke when the woman from row 14 stepped fully into the aisle, the intensity in her voice slicing through the tension. "I know that man," she repeated, louder this time, and with unshakable conviction. "I know exactly who he is." Passengers turned in their seats. Phone cameras rose instinctively, unsure if this was part of the story or something new entirely. Marcus Ellison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He recognized her face now, though the name hadn't surfaced yet. The woman turned toward him with the warmth of memory in her eyes. "I'm Dr. Lena Brooks. I served as a trauma physician at Walter Reed Medical Center for over a decade. Sergeant Ellison came under my care in 2011, after he was airlifted in from Kandahar with shrapnel embedded near his spine, 2 fractured ribs, and a torn ligament from his left knee. Her voice cracked just slightly, emotion slipping through the practiced calm of a doctor who had seen too much. And not once did he complain. Not once did he ask, why me? He just kept asking when he could walk again, when he could get back to his unit. The cabin grew still. The hum of the engines became background noise. People were listening. I remember asking him, while stitching a gash just above his collarbone, "Why do you keep putting yourself in the line of fire, Sergeant?" And he said, she paused, eyes glassy, "Because somebody has to stand between the blast and the ones who don't know it's coming." There was silence again. A silence heavy with understanding. "He saved 12 lives that night," she continued. 12. Some black, some white. One of them was a 19-year-old kid who barely knew how to fire his rifle. He dragged 3 of them through open gunfire on a shredded leg. She scanned the passengers. "And when he came home, what did this country do?" No one answered. "You put him in the back of the plane," she said, voice shaking now. "You questioned his worth based on his skin, not his service." The sting of the accusation settled across the cabin. Everyone heard it, and no one could argue it. Her eyes locked on Shayla, who stood frozen nearby. This isn't just corporate failure. This is generational blindness. This is centuries of pretending that a black man's uniform erases his blackness. It doesn't, and this airline didn't just disrespect a man today. They disrespected a hero. Someone in row 19 began to clap, slowly, and others joined. Not a thunderous applause. It wasn't the kind of moment for that, but a solemn acknowledgement. The sound of people who knew they had witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Phones continued to record. Lena turned to Marcus. "I'm sorry it had to happen this way, but I'm not sorry it's being seen." Marcus gave her a slight nod, barely perceptible, but enough. His face held a tightness, not embarrassment, but restraint. He wasn't used to being praised like this. It wasn't what he fought for. Just then, someone near the back gasped. "Yo, look at this," a young man said, tilting his screen toward his seatmate. "You seeing this?" Eyes turned again. The teen who had first uploaded the video, Kayla, had just caught something with her phone while scanning the cabin. A close-up zoom of a flight attendant's phone screen, snapped without warning. The screen showed a group chat. The message preview was clear. "Another woke stunt. Bet he's faking half that limp anyway." And below it, a message from a contact named Jason M. "Lead attendant. Should have kept him in cargo. LMFAO. Gasps. Disgust. Shock that still in the middle of this media firestorm, someone couldn't help but type what they really thought. Passengers began to shift again. This time with outrage not directed at corporate headquarters or invisible executives, but someone sitting right there among them. Shayla pushed forward, recognizing the name instantly. She turned toward the front row of the crew jump seats, her voice low but urgent. "Jason, give me your phone." He looked up, pretending not to understand. "What?" "Your phone," she repeated. "Right now." Jason blinked. The damage was already done. Several passengers had caught his screen. The photo was already circling Twitter under the tag, "Jason Unmasked." Jason handed the phone over slowly, his face flushing red. Shayla took one look at the group chat, read the last few messages, and then did something unexpected. She walked straight down the aisle and handed the phone to Marcus. "You should see what they think behind closed doors," she said softly. Marcus looked at the screen. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He just exhaled through his nose, nodded once, and said, "So this is the part they never film." A woman in the next row leaned over. "They are now." Multiple passengers were live streaming. News alerts were flooding phones. Racist messages surfaced from crew on viral flight. Airline faces employee backlash mid-air. Black veterans' humiliation escalates as crew texts leak. Marcus handed the phone back to Shayla. "You keep it," he said. "You're the one who still has to work here after we land." She looked at him for a moment, understanding the layers in that statement. Dr. Lena Brooks hadn't sat down. She turned back to the crowd one more time. "Some of y'all didn't stand when this man boarded the flight. That's fine, but if you don't speak up now, when you know, then don't call yourself decent." A heavy silence followed. At that moment, a corporate message leaked to every news outlet. The airline had quietly suspended Marcus's ticket account mid-flight, flagging him as a potential disruption. The cabin air was thick with more than altitude. A silence of realization had swept over the plane, not the kind that followed turbulence, but the kind that settled in when everyone knew something irreversible had happened. There was no way to walk back what had been said, or what had been exposed. Marcus Ellison, still seated in 26B, had become the quiet eye of a digital hurricane. The text messages from lead attendant Jason M. had already gone viral by the time the phone made it back to Shayla's hands. But what no one expected was the chain reaction that had already begun unfolding outside the aircraft. As the plane crossed over West Virginia airspace, screenshots of the offensive group chat had been shared by multiple civil rights organizations, including Justice Watch, Military Against Bias, and even the National Black Veterans Network. The messages weren't seen as isolated ignorance. They were now part of a growing thread that told a much bigger story. Within 30 minutes, justice for Marcus surged to one trending topic worldwide on Twitter. Its momentum wasn't built just on outrage. It was built on receipts. Across Reddit and Facebook, former airline employees, some anonymous, others named, began sharing their experiences. I worked as ground staff in Houston. Black passengers were always the first ones randomly reassigned from upgraded seats. We were told it was policy to maintain a visual brand. We were trained to delay black families if there was a boarding imbalance. Never written down, but we all knew. They buried a complaint I made after a black pilot was mocked by two managers. Said it would cause waves. I quit. The pattern was undeniable. The gate agent incident was not an isolated event, and social media was now treating it like the tipping point. Back in the cabin, Marcus scrolled slowly on a borrowed phone. He hadn't asked for updates. He didn't need to, but one look at the screen confirmed it all. A live thread had pieced together his military history, interview clips, even a short segment from a 2018 panel where he'd said, "You don't wear a flag on your chest so people like you. You wear it so the people who don't still have the right to hate you freely." That quote had now been reposted over 2 million times. Kayla, the teen who first uploaded the video, had gained 300,000 new followers in an hour. Her DMs were flooded with thank yous, support, and the occasional death threat. But she sat across from Marcus, wide-eyed and steady, never once apologizing for pressing record. "You okay?" she finally asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He was staring at a breaking news headline from one of the phones. Breaking: Airline stock down 4.8% in 2 hours, amid racism controversy. CEO monitoring situation closely. He looked up at her. "It's not about me anymore." Kayla hesitated. Maybe it never was. In the front galley, Shayla leaned against the wall, phone against her ear, voice hushed. "I understand, but he's on the plane, sir." "No, I haven't told him yet." She glanced toward Marcus, her throat dry. "Yes, I'll let him know." She hung up and braced herself before walking back down the aisle. The turbulence now was emotional. Every step was weighted by what she had just learned. She knelt beside Marcus once again, speaking so only he could hear. "They've suspended your airline account." He turned to her. "What?" "Mid-flight. They marked it as a potential disruption. You're now flagged in their internal system. That means you can't check in for future flights, unless it's reviewed." Marcus blinked. "While I'm still on one of their planes." She nodded slowly. "They didn't even wait to land." He chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. "So I'm the threat now." The absurdity didn't need to be explained. He hadn't yelled, hadn't resisted, hadn't broken a rule, and still they found a way to paint him as the problem. Passengers nearby overheard. One of them, an older black man in a tailored blazer, leaned in and said firmly, "Let them try it. This country has a very short memory, but it remembers heroes." And then, as if the universe itself wanted to punctuate the moment, another leak hit the net. This time, it was personal. A Twitter account under the name A Flywright with More began to trend. The profile photo was small, grainy, but the face was unmistakable. C. Moore, the same gate agent, who had smirked at Marcus and reassigned his seat. Users uncovered that Moore had run a blog years ago. Poorly hidden, never scrubbed from the web. The content wasn't just political. It was deeply racist. Rants about black entitlement, memes mocking African cultures, even one post titled "Affirmative Action in the Skies," suggesting that black veterans should earn respect, not expect it. Receipts came flooding in. Screenshots, archives, quotes. And the internet did what it does best. It connected dots fast. This is the same Moore who stripped a decorated veteran of his seat. Corporate's response better be more than we're looking into it. This is structural. So the people at the front lines of hospitality are the ones hiding white supremacy in their drafts. News anchors began reporting the blog leak in real time. Marcus's name was now cemented in headlines. Veteran targeted by racist airline staff has airline account suspended mid-flight. Digital protest grows as airline accused of systemic discrimination. Hero treated like luggage, nation reacts to viral plane incident. In the cockpit, Captain Harlow received another call from ground operations. Captain, do not speak to the media when you land. Harlow grunted. I won't have to. The voice on the other end paused. Why not? Because by the time we land, they'll already have everything. As if on cue, the in-flight monitor pinged one final breaking update. The airline's internal chat logs had just been leaked, and they exposed years of complaints silenced from black employees and passengers alike. The cabin no longer felt like a plane. It felt like a courtroom, a newsroom, and a town square rolled into one, pressurized at 35,000 feet. With every passing mile, the story deepened, spreading not only online, but in real time within the cabin itself. What had started as a quiet injustice had now snowballed into an undeniable movement. And the passengers were no longer just observers. In row 18, a young Latina woman named Jasmine, flipping between 3 open apps on her iPad, turned to the people behind her and whispered, "We should do something now, before they try to spin this whole thing again." "What do you mean?" asked a passenger, wide-eyed. "A petition. Midair. We have Wi-Fi, right? Let's use it." Within 5 minutes, Jasmine had opened a Google form titled Justice for Sergeant Marcus Ellison. Demand policy change. Now. She passed her device around, row to row, and soon others were creating QR codes and sharing links via airdrop. The form filled fast. Over 200 passengers on board had signed it before they even began descent. The energy spread faster than the service cart. One couple, black parents traveling with their 2 young children, refused the offered snack tray. "No thank you," the father said calmly to the flight attendant. "Not until your company values the people it feeds." The mom leaned over and whispered to their daughter, "You're watching something important right now. This is what it looks like to stand for what's right. Not just when it's easy, but when it's awkward." 3 rows back, another passenger who'd overheard the exchange turned to her neighbor and said, "I've flown this airline for 15 years, but I'm canceling everything after this." She took a selfie with her boarding pass and posted it with the caption, "A seat is temporary, integrity is not. Justice for Marcus." In the aisle seat of row 26, Marcus sat still. The noise around him had become an ocean of voices, some apologizing, some strategizing, some confessing their own complicity in silence. He hadn't asked for any of this. But what struck him hardest wasn't the petitions or the pledges. It was a voice frail trembling coming from just behind him. "Excuse me," an elderly white woman said softly. She stood in the aisle, gripping the seat back in front of her for support. "I need to say something." Everyone near them quieted. She looked directly at Marcus, her blue eyes full of emotion. "I saw what happened at the gate. I saw the way she looked at you. And I told myself it wasn't my place to step in." Marcus turned, his eyes meeting hers. She swallowed. "But the truth is, I didn't want to be uncomfortable. That was my choice. And it was the wrong one." Her hands shook slightly. "I'm 81. I've seen a lot of wrongs in my time. But silence? It's the most dangerous one of all." Marcus didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes glistened, and he gave the smallest nod, a signal of forgiveness not spoken, but deeply felt. The woman sniffed, wiped her cheek, and added, "It's never too late to learn, and I'm learning right now." Behind her, a man reached forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. Another quietly said, "Amen." The ripple of emotion was contagious, empathy spreading through rows like oxygen. Shayla, watching from the galley, had tears in her eyes. She'd been trained for turbulence, emergencies, even passenger confrontations, but nothing had prepared her for the moral clarity of what was happening on this flight. Back in the cockpit, Captain Harlow was silent as well, listening through the cabin feed. His hands stayed steady on the controls, but his chest was heavy. His job had never been more precarious or more important. In first class, not everyone was moved. One businessman scoffed and mumbled, "Drama. Everyone just wants a headline." The woman beside him turned and said calmly, "You're right. They do want a headline. Because it's time the world saw what we let happen." He didn't speak again. As the plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., the cabin dimmed slightly, and the tension shifted again. Not from fear, but from anticipation. Multiple passengers turned their phones toward the windows, capturing the moment. One live streamer whispered to their audience, "We're about to touch down, but it feels like we're landing in history." Marcus glanced outside. The city skyline stretched in the distance, clean, sharp, and soaked in symbolism. It was a place he'd fought for, a place that represented freedom on paper. But for him, it had never quite felt like home. Shayla approached quietly, squatting beside his row. "You okay?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "They think this ends when the wheels hit the ground." Shayla tilted her head. "Doesn't it?" He gave a small, tired smile. "No, that's when it starts." As the landing gear dropped, the atmosphere in the cabin grew more electric than nervous. Not one person reached for their overhead bags. No one unbuckled early. The seatbelt light felt ceremonial now. The plane touched down smoother than expected, but what waited beyond the tarmac was not. Passengers near the windows gasped, then scrambled to record. Outside the terminal, visible through the large windows of Gate C4, a massive crowd had formed. Protesters lined the glass walls, holding signs that read, "Veterans deserve seats, not smirks. This country can't fly straight with racism in the cockpit. Justice for Marcus. We're watching." Dozens of reporters were outside the jetway entrance, flanked by camera crews in live news vans. Some held microphones up like fishing poles, hoping to catch the first glimpse of the now legendary passenger from seat. Inside the plane, phones buzzed again. Push notifications lit up. Braking terminal overrun with protesters ahead of Flight 4002 arrival. Law enforcement on standby.
Marcus remained seated.
Shayla whispered, "Are you ready?" He took a long breath, steadying the weight in his chest. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. But just before the door opened, a notification flashed across every passenger's phone. The airline's CEO had just released a video blaming the incident on a breakdown in boarding automation and overzealous social media outrage. The ding of the seatbelt sign flicking off wasn't a relief this time. It was a trigger. Passengers didn't spring up like they normally would. No rush to open overhead bins. No shuffling for coats or earbuds. Instead, there was a quiet collective pause, as if the entire cabin recognized that once that plane door opened, nothing would be the same again. Marcus Ellison sat motionless in 26B, his seatbelt still fastened. The screen of the phone he held showed the freshly released video from the airline's CEO, a neatly lit rehearsed statement blaming boarding automation glitches for what had happened. No mention of racism, no admission of fault, no acknowledgement of the text messages, the suspension or the mid-flight cover-up attempts. The internet had already turned on it. Automation doesn't smirk at you. Corporate code for, "We hope y'all forget by next week." Where's the apology to Marcus? Where's the accountability? But inside the plane, Marcus felt the weight settle even heavier. The moment he stepped off, he wouldn't just be a man anymore. He'd be a symbol, and symbols got pulled in every direction. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington, D.C. Please remain seated until we arrive at the gate," and the captain turns off the seatbelt sign. Outside the window, the crowd was undeniable now. Protesters lined every visible pane of glass, a wall of faces holding signs and camera phones. Some weeping, some chanting, all watching. Veterans deserve respect. Being black shouldn't be a boarding risk. Ellison stood for us. Now we stand with him. Captain Harlow appeared again, walking from the front toward the coach section. The passengers parted for him instinctively. He reached Marcus, lowered his voice, and said, "We're not going through a side exit." Marcus nodded once. "I wouldn't have." At the front, airline representatives had already boarded discreetly. 3 of them, bland suits, laminated badges, and PR-trained expressions, waited just out of sight. One of them, a tall man with nervous eyes, stepped forward as Harlow approached. "Captain Harlow, Mr. Ellison, we're going to escort you through a private gate to avoid unnecessary exposure. For your safety." Harlow raised an eyebrow. "You mean for your liability?" Marcus stood slowly. The cabin was silent behind him. He turned to the rep and said calmly, but unshakably, "I came in through the front. I'll leave through the front." The rep opened his mouth to object, but the captain raised a hand. "We'll handle this," Harlow said. Marcus moved through the aisle. Passengers stepped aside. Some reached out to touch his arm. His shoulder gentle, grateful. Others whispered quiet thanks, still recording. A few offered nods, but he kept walking, focused. As he reached the front of the plane, a voice called out from coach. Sergeant Ellison. He turned. It was the young mother who'd refused the snacks. She stood with her child in her arms. Thank you, she said, eyes wet, for making them see us. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't trust himself to. He simply nodded, then turned again. The flight door opened, and the roar began. Outside, the terminal had become a makeshift rally. Protesters filled the hallway beyond the gate, pressed up against temporary barriers hastily installed by airport security. Reporters stood on stepladders to catch a glimpse over the crowd. Microphones were thrust forward. Flashbulbs erupted like fireworks. Mr. Ellison, how do you respond to the CEO's statement? Did you plan to go public with this? Are you seeking legal action? Do you believe this was racially motivated? Marcus blinked at the wall of noise. He didn't respond. Carlos stayed close, acting as a quiet buffer. Shayla trailed behind them, watching everything, recording some of it herself now. Airport security tried to redirect the crowd, but it was too late. A chant had started, loud, clear, rhythmic. Black dignity, not pied pity. Then another swelling behind it. Respect our vets. Respect our vets. It wasn't just anger, it was power. Marcus paused mid-walk. He turned to face the cameras. I didn't ask for any of this, he said. All I asked for was the seat I paid for. The room stilled. But this isn't about seats anymore. It's about who this country lets sit in dignity, and who it quietly asks to move. He looked into the lenses, millions watching now through phones and live streams. If this can happen to me after 3 tours, after 2 surgeries, then you better believe it's happening to people with no medals to protect them, and that should scare all of us. No applause followed, just silence, deep and full of gravity. He continued walking, cameras trailing, until a suited airline rep approached with an earpiece and a clipboard. He looked shaken. Mr. Ellison, Captain Harlow, the CEO would like to speak with you, privately, now. Marcus didn't break stride. Why? He wants to discuss what happens next. Marcus stopped, looked at Harlow. Harlow gave a slight shrug. Your call. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Where? There's a secured conference room just past customs. 5 minutes, no press. He nodded once. Fine. The rep looked relieved, turned, and led them down a side hallway, as the chants behind them grew louder. The room was sterile, glass walls, muted carpet, chrome furniture. The CEO was already inside, seated stiffly at a long table, flanked by a legal advisor and a press consultant. He rose when Marcus entered, but didn't offer a handshake. Mr. Ellison, he said. Captain, thank you for coming. Marcus didn't sit. Harlow stood behind him. The CEO gestured. Please take a seat. We'd like to propose. Let me stop you, Marcus said. Are you here to listen or to spin? The CEO blinked. I'm here to resolve this. Then start with telling the truth, Marcus replied. No automation error. No rogue employee. Tell people what really happened. We're exploring that language, the CEO said. But legally, Marcus held up a hand. Legally, you're terrified. Morally, you're bankrupt. And publicly, you're bleeding. He pulled out his phone and dropped it on the table. The screen showed the petition count. Over 3.2 million signatures. I don't want hush money. I don't want flight credits. I want systemic change. I want records released. I want the complaints you buried unburied. The CEO's eyes flicked to his advisor. We can prepare a joint statement, the press consultant began. Where you— No, Marcus cut in. I'll write my own. The CEO sat down slowly, the weight of the storm finally settling across his face. As Marcus turned to leave, Harlow's phone buzzed. He read the message, looked up and said, You're gonna want to see this. The message read, Whistleblower just dropped airline's internal diversity report. It's worse than we thought. The conference room was cold by design. Glass walls, brushed steel fixtures, and silence thick enough to be strategic. Marcus Ellison stood by the window, watching the swell of reporters and protesters below through a sliver in the blinds. The chants had softened to murmurs, but the pressure they carried hadn't faded. Not even close. Opposite him sat the airline's CEO, Charles Langford, a man built for corporate survival. Crisp suit, polished smile, calculated humility. He didn't offer a handshake this time. Perhaps he'd read enough headlines in the last 2 hours to know it would ring hollow. Beside him were his chief legal counsel and head of public affairs, both seated like they were waiting to be deposed. Captain Harlow stood off to the side, arms crossed, silent for now but watching everything. Langford cleared his throat. Mr. Ellison, first let me say again that I deeply regret how this situation unfolded. Marcus didn't move from the window. Which part do you regret? The seat denial, the text messages, the suspension of my account mid-flight, or the lie you posted about a boarding automation glitch? Langford's face twitched slightly. All of it. Marcus turned. Calm, steady. Then you'll understand why I don't want your apology. The CEO nodded slowly, exchanging a glance with the legal counsel. That's fair, which is why we're offering more. He slid a sleek leather folder across the table. Inside, Marcus saw the top line of a settlement offer, a 7-figure payout, plus lifetime first-class access, and a public statement of regret from the company. No NDA, the lawyer added quickly. You'll be free to speak. We just want to show good faith. Marcus stared at the folder without touching it. Langford leaned forward. We understand that this incident struck a nerve across the country, and we're prepared to help repair that. But we also want to move forward, swiftly, if possible. Marcus didn't blink. You think this is about a seat? Langford paused. No, but we do think the gesture matters. Marcus finally sat down, hands folded. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I fought for a country that never once asked me if I felt welcome. I led troops who didn't always look like me, and some who didn't trust me. I've been saluted and side-eyed in the same uniform. Langford shifted, and I've accepted that America will always struggle to recognize certain kinds of dignity. What I won't accept, Marcus said, is another corporation cutting a check to clean its conscience and calling it progress. The room fell still. I don't want your money, he continued. I don't want your perks. I want something far more inconvenient. Langford raised an eyebrow. And that is? Marcus leaned forward. I want a full audit of racial bias and discrimination complaints across every level of your airline, from gate agents to management. Every buried report, every HR claim. I want it reviewed by a third party, and I want the results made public. The lawyer stiffened immediately. That would expose us to serious legal risk. Langford didn't speak. I know, Marcus said. That's the point. The PR director attempted a softer tone. Transparency is something we value, but such a move could be interpreted as admitting wrongdoing beyond this isolated event. Marcus stood again. This wasn't isolated. You and I both know that. The blog, the messages, the leaked internal chat logs. This wasn't a one-time smirk. It was a culture that let that smirk happen. Langford inhaled deeply. Mr. Ellison, please understand. Our shareholders. Marcus snapped, quiet but firm. Your shareholders don't wake up wondering if they'll be mistaken for a threat while boarding a plane. Langford looked at Harlow now. Captain, you've worked here a long time. Surely you can understand the complexity. Harlow finally spoke. I understand it's only complex when you're afraid of being honest. There was a long, strained silence. The kind that made clear no one in the room had ever been spoken to this way in their own boardroom. Langford attempted a pivot. Perhaps there's a middle ground. We can commission an internal review, supervised by... Marcus shook his head. No internal anything. Third party. Independent. Public. The lawyer leaned in. What if we sweeten the offer? Add funding for a non-profit of your choosing. Diversity scholarships, maybe a...
No.
It was so definitive that even the walls seemed to absorb it. And then an unexpected click. Harlow reached into his blazer and slid a small silver device across the table. A compact audio recorder. Still running. Langford's eyes widened. What is that? I turned it on before we entered the room. Harlow said, to make sure nothing in here got rewritten later. The legal counsel stood immediately. You can't do that without permission. That's illegal in this state. Marcus didn't move. We're in DC one-party consent. Langford's jaw clenched. He knew they were right. Harlow continued, his voice firm. If you try to spin this later, as generosity or negotiation, I'll release this recording. Every word of it. Langford looked furious now, cornered in his own fortress. Marcus stepped forward, calm but unwavering. You say you want to move forward? Then prove it. Show the world you're not scared of what's been buried under your carpets for years. Langford looked at his team, then at Marcus. You're not going away quietly, are you? No, Marcus said. I've been quiet too long. Another silence. This one felt final. Langford closed the leather folder and pushed it aside. I'll consider the audit, Marcus nodded. You'll do more than consider. Just then, the PR director's phone buzzed. She looked down, face paling. She whispered, "We've got a bigger problem. The whistleblower just dropped a second report. Passenger profiles by race were used to flag flight risk behavior across multiple cities." The air in the glass conference room turned electric the moment the PR director whispered the update. Everyone froze. "Say that again," Langford demanded. She held up her phone, screen still glowing. "It's confirmed. The whistleblower dropped a second batch, emails, call logs, HR memos. It shows the airline flagged passengers as flight risks, based in part on race." She swallowed. "They called it a visual risk matrix, used in Chicago, Atlanta, Newark, Dallas, multiple hubs."
Marcus didn't move. He didn't have to. The room was already imploding, under the weight of its own hypocrisy.
Langford stood, pacing now. No one ever signed off on that officially. It was experimental. Quiet. "You buried racism under algorithm," Harlow said. "Now it's screaming through your windows." The whistleblower, an anonymous mid-level operations analyst, had sent the files to several investigative journalists. Within minutes, national media picked it up, screenshots of internal emails, with phrases like "watch for behavioral anomalies, especially on urban routes," and "certain profiles correlate to elevated risk." Applied discretion now flooded Twitter and mainstream headlines. But what hit even harder was something no one in the room had seen coming. A digital folder labeled simply "Capt Harlow." Langford looked up in horror. "What is that?" Harlow, calm but steely, pulled a USB drive from his blazer pocket and set it on the table. "Something I've been collecting for 5 years. Langford scoffed. "That's illegal. I didn't record anyone in private," Harlow said evenly. "But I documented everything. Every complaint from black passengers about mistreatment that went unanswered. Every incident report that magically disappeared from the system. Every time HR retaliated against a crew member for raising concern." Langford's voice dropped. "You've been building a case? I've been preserving what your people tried to erase." The room fell into stunned silence. The drive contained dozens of files, some audio, some typed memos, some screen recordings of internal chats from staff. One particularly damning audio clip featured a senior operations director laughing during a staff call. "Some of these black passengers get offended if you even look at them wrong. It's like walking on eggshells with steel-toed boots." Another clip captured a closed-door meeting where two managers discussed burying a discrimination report because if we admit that one, the floodgates open. One memo from a junior black employee simply read, "If I speak up, I'll be the one walked out." That's how it works here. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost mournful. "You know what's worse than being humiliated?" he asked. "Realizing your humiliation wasn't even personal. It was just protocol." Langford sat down slowly. There was no more defense to mount. By the next morning, the story had leapt from cable news to the front page of major newspapers. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox covered it, each with their own spin, but none able to ignore it. The tapes that talk, inside an airline's culture of quiet racism. How one flight exposed a decade of silence. Too sensitive to fly, the hidden matrix of passenger profiling. Marcus hadn't intended to give interviews, but after requests flooded in from all angles, he agreed to just one. PBS's Frontline, filmed in a quiet studio with no frills. The interviewer asked, "Why speak now?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "Because this was never just about one flight," he said. "It was about how easy it is to shrink a person down to their seat number, or their skin color, or their silence." He took a beat. "I didn't go to war for gratitude. I went so people I didn't know could move through life without fear. And somehow that dream still hasn't boarded the plane." That clip alone was shared over 20 million times. Meanwhile, inside the airline's highest offices, panic was fermenting into betrayal. The board of directors, once content to let Langford take the hits publicly, began discussing his removal behind closed doors. Shareholders had seen enough. The stock had plummeted another 6%. Brand trust was free-falling. Major corporate sponsors were threatening to withdraw partnerships. One board member, in a leaked email, wrote, "He's a liability. He let this fester and thought we could PR our way through it. He needs to go." Another added, "If we don't act fast, we'll lose the veteran community, the black travel market, and our credibility in HR negotiations. This is existential. But Langford wasn't ready to be scapegoated. In a surprise move, he called a press conference the next morning. Without board approval, he stood at a podium, flanked by tired executives, and delivered a 10-minute speech, not of contrition, but of calculated defiance. There has been a concerted attempt to frame this airline as an institution of systemic racism, he said, looking directly into the cameras. We disagree with that narrative. We acknowledge isolated incidents and poor judgment from individuals, but not a culture of discrimination. He continued, what's happening here is not justice. It's overreach. A single incident has been weaponized into a reputation war, and we refuse to be defined by one man's seat. It backfired instantly. The public backlash was volcanic. Comments poured in. He said the quiet part out loud. Marcus was just a seat. Imagine blaming your downfall on the man you racially profiled. The board better wake up before there's nothing left to lead. Marcus watched the speech from his hotel room in silence. Then, slowly, he turned off the TV and picked up his phone. Captain Harlow had already sent him a single message. You were never just a seat. And he just signed his own resignation letter. That night, a reporter leaked a confidential tip. Langford had personally blocked a racial bias training initiative proposed 3 years earlier, calling it a waste of quarterly focus. Behind the boardroom's mirrored doors and down a hallway that never made it into corporate brochures, justice was being traded in whispers. After the press conference backfired spectacularly and leaked memos showed CEO Charles Langford personally shutting down racial bias training years earlier, the board moved quietly but decisively. Langford didn't resign. He didn't apologize. He announced executive realignment. In a heavily scripted email sent to all employees just 2 days after Marcus's PBS interview aired, Langford wrote, "Today we announce several retirements and internal transitions meant to strengthen our long-term commitment to equity and leadership stability." He went on to name 3 senior PR officials who were stepping down, as well as 2 VPs of regional operations. They hadn't planned to step down, but when they refused to take bullets for Langford's decisions, he painted them as the problem. To the outside world, it looked like action. To insiders, it smelled like corporate deflection at cruising altitude. And Marcus? He wasn't impressed. The airline invited him to a legacy-building roundtable, offering a lucrative consulting role to shape their inclusive future. The email was flattering, full of empty praise and phrases like "lead the next era of travel equity." He didn't even reply. Instead, he posted a simple message on social media. When you try to hire the man you humiliated, what you're really doing is laundering your conscience. It received over 1.3 million likes in under a day. The fallout continued. The gate agent, Cheryl Moore, the woman who had smirked at Marcus and reassigned his seat, was formally terminated. The airline made sure to leak the news to the press, calling it an unfortunate but necessary disciplinary step. Moore wasted no time. She filed a lawsuit the next morning for wrongful termination and emotional distress. Her lawyer, during a press statement, said, "My client was made a scapegoat. She followed standard procedure, but when a video went viral, the company sacrificed her to save its brand." Some corners of the internet predictably rallied to her side. Hashtags like "Cancel Culture Airline" and "Gate Agent Scapegoat" began trending among conservative influencers, who painted Marcus as the angry race baiter with a military shield. Meanwhile, Jason M., the lead flight attendant, whose text about putting Marcus in cargo had gone viral, gave a bitter interview to a fringe podcast, claiming he was the real victim. "I was joking with friends," he said. "Everyone's so sensitive now. We can't even laugh without losing our careers." He was fired a week later. Marcus didn't respond to any of it publicly. He didn't need to. Every time one of them tried to flip the narrative, another receipts thread hit Twitter. Screenshots, past complaints, internal documentation. The public wasn't fooled anymore, and Marcus was no longer alone. But then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, as Marcus sat at a park in D.C., watching black kids run drills on a makeshift football field, just a few blocks from the Lincoln Memorial, his phone buzzed. Blocked sender, no subject line, just one message. "You need to see what they said about you before the flight." Attached, a zip file. Encrypted but with a password included in the message. Marcus hesitated. This wasn't the first whistleblower to reach out. But something about the timing, just as the media frenzy was settling into slow burn, felt too precise to ignore. He downloaded the file, punched in the password. Inside were email threads, internal messages, and security notes. Dated 2 days before his flight. The thread was between senior staff in the airline's internal security unit. Subject: veteran passenger. Flag for possible agitation. The body of the message said, passenger Marcus Ellison booked first-class ticket on Flight 4002 to DCA. Public profile includes protest photos and anti-establishment rhetoric, while military service noted, recommend secondary gate discretion. Optics sensitive, treat as watch quietly, passenger not immediate risk. Another response, confirmed. Monitor demeanor at boarding. If defiant, redirect seating discreetly. Do not escalate. Use seat misassignment protocol if needed. Marcus scrolled further. There were notes. His social media posts from years ago being discussed. A speech he gave in 2016, where he'd criticized the VA's lack of equity. A photo of him at a racial justice march in Atlanta, standing silently behind a banner that read, "We built this country too." They'd flagged him before the gate agent ever saw his face. Before the smirk. Before the reassignment. Before the teenage girl hit record. He sat there on that park bench, as children screamed joyfully nearby, the roar of a passing plane overhead, blending into the sound of everything he'd known but now had in writing. It wasn't random. It never was. His chest rose slowly, not with anger, but with vindication. Back at the airline's headquarters, Langford sat in a closed-door meeting with 2 remaining board members, trying to convince them the worst was over. We weathered the storm, he said. The narrative's cooling. But it wasn't cooling. It was about to boil over. That night, Marcus sent the files to 3 national journalists and 1 civil rights attorney. He added only one line. They didn't profile me because I was dangerous. They profiled me because I was black and unafraid. The morning the documents went public, the world was already on edge, but nothing prepared the airline or the nation for what came next. The files Marcus had received were unlike anything seen before. This wasn't hearsay. This wasn't a bitter employee's rant. It was a trove of verified internal communications, time-stamped, personnel tagged, and drenched in damning detail. Hundreds of documents, spanning 9 years, chronicled a systemic effort to shape boarding optics across major U.S. cities. The language wasn't always overt, but the patterns were unmistakable. Avoid overbooking first class on routes departing ATL, DTW, O or D, urban heavy. Optics risk. Customer appears agitated. African American male. Flag for future rerouting. Per visual discretion policy. Minimize escalation follower. High visibility passengers, particularly those who may weaponize social media. One email from a senior strategy officer read, "We're not racist, we're just risk averse. Unfortunately, some optics create more exposure than they're worth." It was a polished version of prejudice. Racism with a corporate signature. Marcus didn't hesitate. He sent the files directly to the Brennan Institute for Civil Rights, a nationally respected legal advocacy group. Within hours, they verified the document's authenticity and called for an immediate federal investigation into the airline's practices. By noon, the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights issued a formal inquiry. The Department of Justice quietly reached out to Brennan attorneys to discuss pattern and practice violations. The speed and scale of response were unprecedented for a private carrier scandal. On every news outlet, the same phrase echoed like thunder. Not just an incident, an institution. Civil rights attorney Nadine Rowe, the Brennan Group's lead strategist, held a press conference the following day. This wasn't about a single man being moved from a seat. This was about a company that systematized racial profiling under the disguise of discretion. These documents reveal not bias but strategy, and strategy is policy. The story went global. International news agencies framed it as a case study in American double standards. Marcus's name became shorthand for the type of resistance that didn't need fists or flames, just facts, voice, and moral clarity. Still, Marcus himself remained measured. He declined multiple television specials. He turned down a book deal. His only post that week was a single paragraph. "This isn't my story anymore. It belongs to every person who's ever been rerouted, talked down to, profiled, or erased. If I can do something with what I've been given, then I will. But not to be famous, to be useful." Behind the scenes, the federal case gathered steam. Attorneys subpoenaed email servers, surveillance logs, and HR complaint databases. The investigation discovered thousands of buried or downgraded complaints, some filed by passengers, others by staff. One of them, from a black flight attendant written 4 years prior, had been marked unsubstantiated. It read, "I've witnessed passengers get reassigned mid-boarding without explanation. Every time, they were black. I brought this to my manager. He told me, that's not your department." Another complaint detailed a supervisor instructing gate staff to use their judgment when seating passengers in premium cabins. Code language the investigation revealed was frequently applied along racial lines. A particularly damning discovery came from archived group chat logs among upper-level management. In one exchange, a route planning director asked, "Should we make the visual ratio more conservative for the 7 a.m. flight out of Newark?" The reply, "Yes. XX on board. No unnecessary noise." The term visual ratio soon became a viral shorthand for corporate-coded racism, an algorithm of erasure. Congress took notice. On a Friday evening, as Marcus sat in his modest DC apartment, answering a backlog of messages from veterans, students and strangers who said he gave them hope, a certified letter slid under his door. It bore the seal of the United States House of Representatives. He opened it carefully, subject to official subpoena to testify before the House Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Consumer Protection. He read the line twice. Then again, it wasn't just a request. It was a mandate. Congress wanted Marcus to speak, on record, in front of the nation. He sat back slowly in his chair, hands on his lap staring at the document. There was no fear in his eyes, only weight. He understood what it meant. This wasn't about one airline anymore. This was about an entire system of excuses that hid behind policies and protocols. He picked up the phone and called Harlow. "They want me to testify," he said. Harlow didn't hesitate. "Of course they do. You made them listen. Now they want to see." Marcus paused. "I don't want to be a symbol, John." "You're not," Harlow replied. "You're a mirror. That's what scares them." That same night, Langford met with the board for what was supposed to be a routine update. Instead, it turned into an ambush. One director slid a copy of the subpoena across the table. "You had this on your desk 5 days ago." Langford said nothing. Another director added, "We're done spinning. He's going to speak, and when he does, we're not going to be the ones holding the mic. He is." Langford knew then that his grip was slipping. Power was shifting. And this time, there was no first-class exit to sneak out the back. As Marcus prepared for the hearing, his inbox pinged. An anonymous source offered to testify beside him. A former VP. "I helped design the Matrix. I'll tell the world what we really built." The day Marcus Ellison walked into the Rayburn House office building, the air outside felt strange, thick with the weight of something inevitable. The crowd was already spilling past the barricades. Journalists with boom mics, civil rights advocates holding signs, veterans in full uniform, and everyday citizens who came not to shout, but to listen. It wasn't a trial. It was a reckoning. Inside, the congressional hearing chamber was tense. C-SPAN was broadcasting live. But this wasn't politics as usual. Even the usual posturing from lawmakers was subdued. People had seen the files. They'd heard the tapes. They knew what was coming wasn't just testimony. It was truth given voice by a man who had endured too much silence for too long. Marcus sat at the witness table, his posture upright but not rigid. No prepared speech in front of him. Just a man, his memory, and the weight of every passenger who'd ever been shuffled backward for the comfort of others. The chairman, a congressman from Maryland, nodded toward him. "You may proceed, Mr. Ellison." Marcus took a breath. "When I was 16, he began, my mother told me to sit near the front of the bus when I rode through certain neighborhoods. She said if I sat in the back, people would assume I didn't belong, maybe even that I was a threat." He paused. "I thought that ended when I put on a uniform, when I earned a medal, when I nearly lost a leg for a country that told me I was part of something bigger." He looked up now directly at the panel. "But a few weeks ago, I paid for a first-class ticket, and a gate agent, without reason, without hesitation, moved me to coach. And then your airlines blamed the machine." A hush fell across the room. "They said it was an error. Then they said it was isolated. But the files say otherwise. The emails say otherwise. The names of hundreds of passengers flagged, redirected, humiliated say otherwise." He adjusted his seat, voice steady. "This wasn't about my seat. It was about my place. In their system. In their logic. In their eyes." He leaned forward. "You don't fix that with a press release. You don't fix it with diversity slogans. You fix it when you stop asking black people to be quiet when they're disrespected, and start asking the systems why they were built that way in the first place." A few gasps echoed from the back. One congresswoman blinked away tears. Another adjusted his tie nervously. Marcus continued. Too many black passengers have learned to lower their heads when the smirks come. We downplay it to keep moving, but every act of silence costs something. And I've paid enough. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Ellison, for the record, what are you asking this body to do? Marcus didn't miss a beat. Mandate independent equity audits for all major carriers. Public reports, transparency on complaint tracking, penalties for companies that bury discrimination under discretion, and legal protection for employees who speak up. Another representative leaned in. Do you believe this is limited to one airline? Marcus shook his head slowly. No, sir. I believe this is what happens when no one's watching, and no one believes the people who are. His words settled like a gavel. Hours later, clips from the hearing dominated headlines. Veteran exposes airline racism machine. Not just a seat. Marcus Ellison's testimony shakes aviation industry. Congress grills carriers after shocking discrimination files leak. That evening, multiple airlines released vague commitments to review current practices. But within days, pressure mounted. Lawsuits flooded in. Class actions from black travelers. Wrongful termination suits from employees who'd been punished for filing internal bias reports. And most damning of all, a Department of Transportation audit launched across all 4 major domestic airlines. Behind closed doors, CEOs held emergency strategy calls, PR firms were fired, new policies were drafted overnight, including a federal mandate that all boarding protocol changes be logged and reported with rationale. Marcus didn't celebrate. He didn't post. He didn't do interviews. He walked through the Capitol, shook hands with civil rights leaders, and then slipped into a rental car bound for Baltimore. No cameras. No entourage. A few weeks later, the NAACP offered him their Freedom Flight honor. He declined it quietly, suggesting they give it to a former flight attendant who had filed complaints years ago and had been let go without cause. That woman's acceptance speech went viral too. In the background of it all, Marcus returned to his quiet life, mentoring local teens, volunteering at a community food drive. One reporter asked why he'd walked away from the spotlight. He responded, I was never chasing it. I just didn't want the next kid who looks like me to have to choose between silence and survival. And still the ripple effect moved. Congress passed a bipartisan measure titled the Equity in Air Travel Act, which included mandatory equity training and standardized boarding documentation. For the first time in aviation history, passengers could request review of their boarding treatment through a third-party, federally monitored system. The law didn't fix everything, but it forced visibility on an issue that had lived in shadows for too long. Then, one day, at a quiet regional airport in North Carolina, Marcus was traveling again, this time alone, dressed in plain clothes, no cameras waiting. As he approached the security line, a small voice tugged at the silence. Mom? A boy said, pointing. That's him. That's the man from the plane. Marcus paused, surprised. The mother, startled, tried to hush the child, but the boy kept staring. Marcus walked over gently. Hey there. The boy looked up. You changed the rules, didn't you? Marcus smiled softly. Some of them. The mother's eyes filled. I'm sorry to bother you, he saw you on the news last month. Been talking about it ever since. Marcus nodded slowly. Thanks for saying hi. The boy looked confused. They let you sit wherever now, right? Marcus knelt to his level. Sometimes, but the goal isn't just to sit anywhere. It's to be treated right, no matter where you sit. The boy beamed. That's what my teacher said too. Marcus stood, gave the mother a small nod, and moved forward toward the gate. As he walked through the terminal, his phone buzzed. An invite to speak at the White House Aviation Equity Summit, signed by the president. The boarding call echoed through the terminal, Flight 48-2 to Washington, D.C., and Marcus Ellison stepped into line. Same flight, same route, same airline. But nothing about this moment was the same. There was no hesitation from the gate agent this time. No furrowed brow, no questioning glance at his ticket or uniform. Just a polite nod and a routine scan of his boarding pass. Welcome aboard, Mr. Ellison, the agent said, eyes clear but heavy with recognition. Marcus gave a curt nod, his silence deliberate. Not rude. Just tired. He'd fought too hard to be seen for more than a gesture. He walked down the jet bridge slowly, each step echoing with memories of the day everything changed. The same aluminum tunnel, the same stale air, But the weight was different now. Less about shame, more about gravity. When he reached the cabin, a flight attendant greeted him warmly. "Thank you for flying with us, sir." Again, no stutter, no confusion. He made his way to seat 1A, first class window side, and sat down without a single glance or redirected question. No eyes tracking him like a misfit. No whispers, just a man in his seat, as entitled to the space as anyone else. But entitlement was never the point. Dignity was. As he settled in, Marcus leaned back and stared out the window. The airport lights shimmered off the tarmac like the past still flickering in his periphery. He felt the hum of the engines, not as noise but as rhythm, reminding him how far he'd come, how far there still was to go. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. The envelope was creased from being opened and closed too many times. On the back, a name written in messy cursive, Jalen M. The letter read, "Mr. Ellison, I saw your story on YouTube. My mom cried when you testified. I never thought someone like me could make change without yelling or fighting. Because of you, I joined my school's social justice club. We're learning how to advocate. We're trying to get Black history added to our curriculum. Because of you, I believe it's possible to change things without burning it all down. Thank you for not staying silent when you could have walked away. Jalen." Marcus closed his eyes. The hum of the aircraft filled the quiet. It wasn't applause. It wasn't headlines. But this was why he'd kept going. Not for the courts or the cameras, but for the people who saw themselves in his restraint, in his refusal to disappear, in the man who took his seat and never left the truth behind. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Alvarez. We're honored to have a very special guest aboard today, Sergeant Marcus Ellison. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Ellison's courage not only served us in combat, but also sparked a nationwide reckoning about dignity and equality in how we fly. On behalf of this crew, and every one of us who learned because he didn't stay quiet, thank you." A murmur passed through the cabin. A few passengers clapped softly. Marcus gave a subtle nod, but didn't turn. He didn't need recognition. He just wanted change. Outside the window, the runway stretched like a long reminder, and in his mind, the memories looped again. The first smirk. The reassignment. The teen girl's shaky recording. The captain's intercom speech. The firestorm. The lies. The file. The hearing. The boy in the airport who called him the man who changed flying. It all started with a seat. The kind of seat most people take for granted. He looked around the cabin. Everyone was in their space. Some sipping coffee, others flipping through magazines, one already asleep. How many stories like his had happened in silence? How many men and women had quietly taken their demotion, their humiliation, their denied dignity, without cameras, without applause? That was the real question now. Not how he'd endured, not even how he'd fought, but how many stories never get seen, because the cameras weren't rolling. He folded Jalen's letter carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat. The engines roared softly as the plane taxied toward the runway. Marcus leaned back in seat 1A and closed his eyes, not because he was escaping, but because he finally could rest. Not because the fight was over, but because he'd helped make sure the next one wouldn't have to start in silence. No one should have to wear a uniform or carry scars to be treated with basic dignity. If you've ever felt invisible in a place you had every right to be, if this story made you pause, made you angry, made you remember, type yes if you believe silence should never be the price of justice.